Hello! Welcome back to Final Fantasy Memories, the series where I talk about the Final Fantasy games and my experiences, past and present with them. Or at least the ones I played before. Except that I just got done playing 2 and 3, which I've never played before, so I don't really know what this series is about anymore. Oh, whatever. It gets like a fifth of the views Dragon Ball Dissection does, so nobody's even here anyway. But some of you are here. And God, I'm getting off to a negative start, aren't I? No, I'm really excited to talk about this one, Final Fantasy V, and I really didn't expect to be this excited to talk about it, which makes me even more excited to talk about it, because I just had like an epiphany, a mind-blowing epiphany over this. Because Final Fantasy V brings me back to games I actually do have memories about, because 2 and 3 were games I hadn't played before, and played specifically for this. While I can't say that I ever disliked Final Fantasy V, it certainly wasn't my favorite, or anywhere near my favorite. Here's the thing, I know that I had after I did Final Fantasy II, there was a long break before I came back from Final Fantasy III. That I said last time that I kind of lost interest for a while and just came back to it after a while. But I have to admit, part of the reason is that I'd never been a huge fan of the job system, and since I started out with 4, that meant that I play 3 and then I go straight into 5, and part of me was thinking, oh God, I gotta play both the job system games back to back? I'm never gonna get through this. This is gonna be terrible. I don't think it was, quite that negative about it, but it was enough that it was like, I don't really feel like playing this much anymore. But, as I said in Final Fantasy III Memories, I think that playing through Final Fantasy III helped me appreciate the job system in Final Fantasy V more. And now getting to 3 really made me kind of appreciate the job system more. Yeah, that. And like I said there, it's not because the job system in 3 was so bad and terrible that it's like, oh God, I didn't realize how lucky I had it. It's just that I don't think it's exclusive to 3. I think it was playing all 3 of the 8-bit games back to back that helped me appreciate that. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me go back to understand how I got to the point I am right now. Let me go back to when I first played this game. So it is kind of weird doing all this. So me doing this in order of the series gets me way out of order from when I actually played the games. So I don't want to go give away too many of those details till I get to those games, but suffice it to say, the first Final Fantasy game I played was Final Fantasy VIII, and then I played Final Fantasy VII, and both of those were on PC, because both of those games were officially ported to personal computer. And then I bought Final Fantasy IV on Super Nintendo from a friend of mine, as I said in that video. So I kind of come to a crossroads at this point. I was obsessed with Final Fantasy, but I didn't really have much of a way to play most of the rest of the games, because I've always been a die-hard Nintendo fanboy. Up to that point, I'd never owned a system that wasn't Nintendo. But I realized that in order to fulfill my Final Fantasy experience, I was going to have to get a PlayStation 2, because Final Fantasy IX was exclusively on PlayStation. There were Final Fantasy Anthology that had Final Fantasies V and VI was for the PlayStation. Final Fantasy X was about to come out, which was for the PlayStation 2. So, Christmas of 2001, I was 15 years old, that was the Christmas of Final Fantasy. I got a PlayStation 2, I got Final Fantasy Anthology, I got Final Fantasy Chronicles, so I get another copy of Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger, I got Final Fantasy IX, and I got Final Fantasy X. So for the next year and a half or so, I was doing nothing but playing Final Fantasy. That's how slow I am, or was, at this kind of stuff. And I played them in order. So I started with 5, then did 6, then did 9, then I did 10. So, to a certain extent, from that perspective, 5 got kind of a bad rap for me. Again, not that I disliked it. I really enjoyed playing the game, but there is sort of that feeling where I was looking forward to things. I had all these other games these newer games, things I hadn't seen before, and I could get to them if only I finished Final Fantasy V. So it got kind of... I played the openings to Final Fantasy VI and 9 and 10 so many times for the next year, or however long it took me to get to each of those games, until I actually got to play them for real. So it was just tantalizing me. And 5 was what was standing in my way to play any of the rest of those. So because of the fact that it was the first one in this big marathon, sort of made it seem worse, because it was keeping me from everything else. And then the big thing was, like I said before, in Final Fantasy III memories, is it was the job system. There was the fact that it gave me so many options that I didn't want to take any of them. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I think that has something to do with my first experience of Final Fantasy VIII, where I'd gotten I was a stupid RPG player. I think probably up until now, up until this run-through right here where I'm doing these videos, I was a stupid RPG player. So the first time I played Final Fantasy VIII, I got almost to the end of the game, but then I got to a point where I could not progress any further. There was this boss that kept on killing me, and again, I'm not going to get into the details, but there was a point in the game where there was nothing I could do to improve. I was stuck. I was stuck in a place where I couldn't get any stronger, and the boss kept killing me. I couldn't get out of there, so I finally just had to start the game over from scratch. And I was at the beginning of Disc 4 at this point, and I had to start over from scratch, so like 60 hours or whatever was completely wasted. And so I think I was always sort of terrified about screwing things up. So, I didn't care about strategizing. I was the worst kind of, I realize now, I was the worst kind of player that sort of the old school Final Fantasy fan would criticize about newer school Final Fantasy fans. I never considered myself really, because I played Final Fantasy 1, I played Final Fantasy 4, I played all the older stuff, so I never considered myself that before. But now I realize that, yeah, I really did play these games for the story. And while I really was always intrigued by the gameplay as well, it was always sort of a secondary thing. It was, the penance I had to pay to get to the next cutscene kind of thing. So, so the job system scared the crap out of me. Having all these options available, having everything. Before I get any farther than that, for the uninitiated, this is how Final Fantasy V's gameplay works. Again, it's the job system like in Final Fantasy III, but it's been completely revamped. The basics are the same. You have your main characters, and you can assign them Final Fantasy based jobs. Your fighters, your monks, your mages, your bards, your geoman, stuff like that. And you can switch out jobs to whatever suits what you're doing. What makes it different from Final Fantasy III is that, well, first of all, there are no longer any penalties for changing jobs. In Final Fantasy III, after a battle you get capacity points, and it would cost capacity points to change from job to job, and you were changing to a job that's really different from your current job, it would cost more points. The more skilled you were in a certain job, the fewer points it would take to change back to it. So it did sort of encourage you to pick a path and just kind of go with it. Because you couldn't just change as much times as you want. You sort of had to make a decision and say, I want this character specialized in this kind of skill, and and stick with that. This game takes that away. There are no more skill levels for jobs. There are no more capacity points. You can change jobs whenever you want to. You can go to the menu at any time and change out jobs. There's no penalty. As many times I could go to the menu and change 50 different times before even going to another battle. It would not mean anything. Because it does encourage you to change jobs more than Final Fantasy III did. Because the other difference is, rather than gaining capacity points at the end of battle with experience points, you get ability points. Which is, this is really the first game to have something called ability points. And while there aren't any skill levels, your jobs still do gain levels based on the ability points you get. And when a job gains a level, it teaches you an ability. So every job has their own secondary battle command, aside from attack and item. For example, knights have a secondary command that's called guard. You select guard and it takes hits for other characters. Thieves can, of course, steal in battle. That's their secondary command. So when you gain a level in a job and you gain an ability, you can then assign that ability as a sub-ability to another job. So let's say I've gained a level in Thief and I've gained the Steal ability. So that means I can change my character to a Knight, and in addition to his Guard ability, I can assign Steal as another ability. So I can have a Knight that steals. I can have a Thief that casts Black Magic. I can have a Geomancer that guards. I can have a Bard that can sense traps, stuff like that. So that's the magic of Final Fantasy V, is that you can customize jobs based on the abilities you've taught each individual character. And like I said, when I first played this at the end of 2001, beginning of 2002, when I was 15, 16 years old, that terrified me. I wanted no part of this. A part of what terrified me is that, for example, in Final Fantasy IV, everybody had their own set job. That meant that they had their own unique abilities that were specific to that character and their own specific set of equipment that they could use. In Final Fantasy V, since I could change my character's jobs on the fly, I was like, my thoughts are, does that mean I have to get 4 sets of every single equipment? How am I going to do that? Like, what happens if I go into a battle and suddenly need this certain class, and I don't have any equipment for it, and I'm stuck on the top of some kind of mountain dungeon or whatever? So I was like, I'm never gonna have money for this. So my solution was, monks. The second thing they learn in the game is Bare Fist, which means they can punch things, and I can assign that to other jobs, and I never have to buy a weapon again. So I basically didn't use any sub-ability except for Bare Fist the entire flippin' game. I just assigned Bare Fist to everybody. Had them all, I think I had them all learn the same jobs at the same time, too. And therefore basically sucked every bit of fun out of this game. So I think that had a lot to do with why my opinion of Final Fantasy V was somewhat lower than that of other games. Because I broke that game. And I don't mean in the video gamer sense of, oh, I'm so great that I broke all the difficulty. I meant I broke everything that made this game enjoyable. So, again, like I said, I was a really stupid role-playing gamer up until recently. So I never thought about strategizing. I would just take the strategy guide and read what I have to do, and so if they told me I needed some black mages in my party, well, there we go, there's a black mage. Which again is also part of my problem with the job system in general, was that up until Final Fantasy X-2, is that you couldn't switch jobs in battle. Once you're in a battle, it's, you're stuck with what you got, and hopefully you have a party that, matches what you need to do. So I would just read the strategy guides. I would just, level grind until I got strong enough to punch things to death, and that was pretty much it. I have some white magic, I spam cure spells, I punch things, and then eventually they die. And, it's about as simple as that. But I'd never really experiment with anything. And yeah, it's just not as fun that way. There's no thought involved. I was just trying to get from cutscene to cutscene. And I think by the time I replayed the game when I was in college, it was about 2007, that I realized that and did things a bit differently, gave my different characters different jobs, and didn't always use Bare Fist, but I still wasn't really taking full advantage of this. So when I say that playing the 8-bit games helped me appreciate this game more, it's that it really forced me to take the focus off of story and pretty, cutscenes and character things. But, if anybody follows my channel, that I'm really big into story and characters, and so it's natural that I would, like it in these games. That's what got me into these games in the first place, was story. But it sort of, forced that to take a back seat, and also forced me to have to think about the way I was creating my characters. because, you know, similar to this game in Final Fantasy II, you start out with characters who are complete blank slates, and you have to mold them into a direction. You have to take them and, you know, and not just think about individual party members, but how they coalesce as a whole group. And so just like in 2 and in 3, I had to think about where I wanted my characters to go in the long term, and, you know, have them specialize in certain jobs that would mesh well together. And again, like with the rest of the games, I've said this before, I would follow along with H.C. Bailey's walkthroughs. Not I would follow along, but I would follow up my playthrough with, you know, corresponding videos. I don't like to do that where I'm just spamming a strategy guide kind of thing. I make my own decisions and go back and watch his and see what he did differently. And on occasion I tweak things based on that. But for the most, and for the most part, a lot of ways we did come out with fairly similar party structures. But I think some of that was coincidence, and some of it might have been me following afterwards. But and some things were different. But it did just help me understand the game mechanics more than I did before. So this time I played Final Fantasy V, and I really, for the first time, I felt like I knew what I was doing. I felt like I was having fun making decisions and assigning roles and learning abilities, to the point where doing that felt more fun than actually advancing the plot. And that kind of amazed me, and that's the reason why I was so excited to talk about this game right now, is because finally, after 13 years, this makes sense to me. And that was really exciting, and being able to bask in the fruits of the decisions I made earlier in the game was really satisfying for the first time, much more so than just having everybody punch things until they were dead. Because there were just things I'd never really paid attention to before, jobs I'd never bothered with, that things I just never really taken much stock in. And this is different from Final Fantasy III in the sense that all the jobs are unique. They're much more balanced than they were in 3. There were definitely a lot of jobs in 3 that I would never have any reason to use. There were a lot of jobs in 3 that were simply upgrades to previous jobs. And then, of course, there were 2 master jobs, ultimate jobs, Ninja and Sage, which, if you had any kind of intelligence, you would just go to those jobs and leave everything else alone. But it's, you know, there's much more to it than that in 5. There are kind of master jobs, but I'll get to that in a minute. But for the most part, there are interesting, or at least useful, abilities for pretty much every job. You might not always want to have a geomancer in your party, but there are some abilities they have that you want to learn just because they're, you know, good. Like, you know, they're anti-trap things where you can find holes and not fall in them, stuff like that. Bard. I mean, Bard is like the running gag of the Final Fantasy franchise. You know, in 3, no reason to ever use a Bard. In 4, you know, Gilbert/Edward, whatever you want to call him, was pretty much the pretty lame character in that game. But Bard was the first freaking job I mastered in this game. I mean, granted, that was because it's not that hard to master a Bard. They don't require that many ability points. But the songs, I actually used them for quite a bit of the game. There were some really good status effect songs. Songs that allowed me to confuse the enemies or stop them. Requiem, that song saved my butt. That does major damage to undead enemies. Doesn't cost any kind of MP. In the pyramid and in one of the water-based lithograph caves, it made life so much easier for me to have the sing ability. Even though I wasn't using the Bard anymore by that point, I had the sing ability, and that was great.